you join us as, once again, the situation regarding Ukraine changes dramatically and suddenly. Having heard from a Kremlin aide this morning that Vladimir Putin was not minded to agree any part of this ceasefire deal, a press conference with Vladimir Putin and the Lukashenko of Belarus has just concluded, in which Vladimir Putin has said that he does actually agree with the ceasefire, but that it needs to lead to lasting peace, and that he has questions for President Trump about some of the details. Aggie Chambre, LBC's political correspondent, has been listening into that press conference. Come bring us up to speed.
This is a huge moment, Tom. So there were, of course, these plans that have been agreed by Ukraine and the US for an interim 30-day ceasefire. As you alluded to there, it sounded like the Kremlin potentially might just reject these ceasefire proposals. We heard from a Kremlin aide, Yuri Yushakov, earlier today, suggesting that this would just give Ukraine a temporary respite. But then we had this press conference between Belarus and Russia, Putin talking, and for the majority of it, they just did not mention the ceasefire. And then there was a Q&A, and this happened.
We agree with the proposals for the ceasefire, but our position is based on the assumption that the ceasefire would lead to a long-term peace, something that would remove the initial reasons for the crisis.
Something that would remove the initial reasons for the crisis. You can tell that there's going to be quite a few stumbling blocks to get to this. And he is already saying as well that he does have a lot of questions for Donald Trump.
So the idea in itself is correct and we support it, but there are questions that need to be discussed. And I think we need to discuss this with our American partners. Maybe we need to have a call with President Trump and discuss this.
Perhaps they need to have a call with President Trump. Well, I think that is probably pretty likely to happen. These calls, these meetings are happening with increasing regularity, and I'm sure Donald Trump will want to get on the phone very quickly to see whether this is going to become a reality or not. But as you say, huge kind of meetings about to happen. It's interesting because there was lots of kind of cold water being poured on this. There was a former US Special Representative for Ukraine, Kurt Volker, saying that Russia would be unlikely to take part in ceasefire talks in good faith, and other suggestions that they just wouldn't take it seriously. But now it does look like this really could happen, at least this 30-day ceasefire, and then peace talks after that, and then followed by potentially long-standing peace.
When Putin says needs to end the initial reasons for the crisis, from the Russian standpoint, the initial reasons for the crisis were, in their view, the expansion further towards Russia of NATO. So that, in theory, might mean there needs to be some guarantees to Russia over the status of Ukraine and its future potentially in NATO or with NATO, aligned to NATO, whatever that might mean.
Yes, but that's very difficult. And I think this we're going to work out how very difficult that is quite quickly. You know, you have the UK saying, Keir Starmer saying a couple of weeks ago that Ukraine is on an irreversible path towards NATO, and other countries believe that as well. So if the suggestion is going to be from Vladimir Putin that can't happen, I think that might be quite a difficult stumbling block to get past. Having said that, Zelensky went into the White House, I think it was about 10 days now, and kind of stuck to his guns. He, tried to put Donald Trump in his place, and he ended up essentially apologising and having to take a completely new tact in dealing with Donald Trump. So you can tell that everyone's recalibrating constantly and working out how to deal with this new world order.
Aggie, stay there. Robert Fox joins us, defence editor for the Evening Standard. Thanks for coming on, Robert. I mean, what did you make of what you heard from the Russian president there?
Well, I'm still grappling with the detail of this. I think that he's a masterly poker player. I didn't believe when he'd made this show, and he's very good at the showmanship, as much as Trump. They're both very interesting in this regard. When he went to Kursk in fatigues, I thought, aye, something is up. This is not an idle gesture. I think Putin has a very, very clear long game. I've been thinking about this a lot. Went back through the records, his speeches since coming to power, two crucial ones. And the stuff that we were hearing from Volker, the former special representative, it's nonsense, I'm afraid. This guy plans long, and he wants a long-term place and partnership of Russia in the security of Europe. That seemed almost to be on the cards at the beginning of the 1990s.
Just to pause on that, Robert, because that's a very important conclusion to have drawn from this.
I know it's important.
I know. That's why I want to pause on it for just a second, because it wasn't that long ago that Russia was involved in the security apparatus of Europe, because it was sitting around the then G8 table, for example.
Yeah, but there was also the North Atlantic Council, the NATO-Russia Council, which was set up in the immediate aftermath of the great peace dividend announcements by James Baker III, very, very significant Secretary of State, almost more important than his president, the first Bush. And they really meant it. And there was even crazy discussion. I mean, it was the stuff of fantasy that perhaps Russia could join NATO. This is after around the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it is this question of partnership. And the thing that Putin, like so much in Europe, including UK, aging populations, he has a very good idea of the destiny of the Russian people and the Russian entity. That's what his essay of July 2021 was about, and it looks like magical, mystical land to us. But it doesn't. It means something to them, and he really wants to get back in. He wants two things. He wants recognition of the security concerns, but of course he does want the taps open again. He really needs to get that gas, particularly, but also oil flowing into Western Europe. And there's a whole chunk of the German economy and polity, population that would want it, and above all, Italy. There's a lot going on here. The detail, I agree with you, is going to be extraordinarily difficult and granular, because we've got to come to the OSCE rules of guaranteeing the sovereignty, non-violation by military means of borders for Ukraine and all of those Central Eastern European powers.
And
so
it was a long time ago.
Robert.
It was a long time ago, but Putin did talk, I think, at a Munich Security Conference 2007, about the sovereignty of countries to be able to decide their own security arrangements. Now, that quote has obviously been played back at him when the Russians, and I guess, again, we're picking it up sort of line by line, as it were, but when Putin talks about this has to deal with the initial reasons for the crisis, he is going to make a demand of the United States to say, no, that Ukraine can never join NATO.
I think that they will freeze that, and you're absolutely right, because this phase of the crisis was triggered the year after the Munich conference, was when there was a NATO summit in Bucharest in April 2008, when the aspiration of Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO was recognized by Condoleezza Rice, the two key foreign ministers, Condoleezza Rice and David Miliband. Where, why, how, and what the consequences of that gesture, and it was a floating, almost vapid gesture, was never worked out. And Russia went to war with Georgia over South Ossetia within 8 weeks.
Robert, really, really grateful to you. Thank you for coming on. Robert Fox, defence editor for the Evening Standard.